Welcome to Things Go Sideways. This is a space for honest conversations about change. When pushing through stops working, when the strategies that once made you successful begin to feel thin, and you find yourself stuck in the middle without a clear map forward. There are no neat, tidy bows here. There's just real stories about what it takes to stay oriented when everything that you thought was certain collapses. Today, I'm joined by Matt West. Matt is a leadership coach. He is a facilitator, a speaker, an amazing person. I can say that. I've met Matt in person. He's the author of Bend Don't Break, How to Adapt in the New World of Work. And his work centers on adaptability, not as a buzzword, but as a lived experience. Matt, thank you for being here.
KiKi, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. And if you're listening to this in audio, you're not going to see it, but I'm actually holding up the book, Bend Don't Break. Matt, I've been so excited about reading this. It's been great. As you know, it's the Things Go Sideways Book Club Book of the Month. We've been having a great time reading it, but we'll talk about the book. We'll talk about what got there. Take us back to that sideways moment. What was happening in your work or in your life when you realized that the old story wasn't going to hold?
Yeah, it's a great way to kick off what I'm sure will be a really interesting conversation. And I have to say, there's really not one sideways moment. Instead, I've kind of had a sideways career.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a theme throughout my career, this idea of shifting, reinventing, changing as the environment is changing around me. I actually started my career as a musician.
No, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, so I had a chance to travel and tour and do some really interesting things very past life when I was much younger, and quickly realized, okay, this might not be the life that I want to lead. So then I got into graphic design and have always really enjoyed creativity and improvisation. You'll notice those are themes in my career for sure. Was able to work that into a creative director, but then I became a consultant and started to really focus on the human side of business, went into learning and development. I'm not even covering it at all, but the reason I tell you all these things is just to realize that from the outside, it might look like I'm throwing away these careers, but really it's about reinvention. It's about constant adjustment. What I began to notice is that whenever I would start to get comfortable, the context would change. Things would go sideways, to use your own words. And I had to figure out whether that was new technology or the people around me or industries changing or even just life changes for me, new seasons in my personal life. In every instance, the realization wasn't necessarily, oh, I'm failing at this thing. It was, oh, the rules are changing and I'm changing as a person. So rather than just sitting with this comfort, if I tie my identity too much to being this musician or to being this graphic designer, then I'm going to really struggle. So my sideways moment wasn't necessarily a crash. It was a pattern. It was a pattern of beginning again, not beginning from ground zero, but just being curious and becoming a learner. I realized later in life, and part of the reason I wrote the book, that this beginner mentality is a really great advantage. If you embrace it, if you understand it, if you really get into that curiosity side of things. And I realized that adaptability isn't something that I necessarily studied at first, but it was something that I realized I needed and I noticed in people around me, and that led to the book.
I really do appreciate the book because in the book, and I guess I actually will go into something that I read in there that speaks to the why of how it came to be. You talk about how some of your approaches with how you talked with your kids, how those approaches no longer seem to work the way that they used to. And that formula seemed to be broken, for lack of a better word. So, like, you began to look at and explore what would work. And that I think was really interesting to think about because I also have gone through changes with my own daughter who's getting ready to go into college. And I started thinking about how my approaches as a parent have had to change. So, talk to me a little bit about that decision to study that moment, to study the disruption instead of resisting it. Because I think a lot of us are like, no, 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 maybe it just didn't work this time. Let's keep going. You decided, okay, I'm not going to resist it. I'm going to study this and figure out what will work. What did that decision look like in real terms? What did you actually start doing differently?
Yeah. In a word, that decision was imperfect, just messy. And I think that's important to understand in all of this. And the reason I write about that in the book is because I think it's really symbolic to what's happening in our professional lives as well. So I actually have four kids. Three of them are adults now. I have one more who's in high school. And very early on, my wife and I decided, okay, this is how we want to raise our kids. These are the principles and the rules and all of these things that we wanted to do. And boy, it just would backfire on us. And it was really fascinating. Sometimes things would work and sometimes they wouldn't. So there's this natural adjustment. But I think in our minds, we were aiming for this moment when we had it figured out, when we could say, we got there, we could write the parents' manual because we've got it all figured out. What we realize is that that moment never arrived, and it hasn't arrived yet either. And so the realization was, oh, the need is to constantly adjust and to change. I talk about parenting our kids when they were very little and how you could have a really simple process of consequences and help them to understand those things. But then when they became teenagers, you realize, oh, I need to rethink this. This is more about principles. This is more about care and support and failure and creating environments where they could fail and you'd still be supportive of them. I got to tell you, even as I talk about this, I just am reminded I'm such an imperfect parent. So everything I say, take it all with a grain of salt. But I think that's the thing is what I'm trying to do is not to be the perfect parent, but to be the adaptable parent, the parent that shows up in the moment, which is unique. We look for patterns, but the truth is that every moment is new. Whether you're parenting, whether you're working, it's never happened before. We can pull off of past experience. Of course we should do that. But if we're in that moment, if we're curious, if we're not judgmental of those around us and ourselves, then we can decide the next best version of ourselves that should be in that moment. It works in parenting and it works on the job.
And you do speak quite a bit about, because it is about how to adapt in the new world of work. You speak quite a bit in the book about the impact of AI. And there are so many concerns that people have, lots of fear around AI, everything from how do I need to adapt and what do I need to learn in order to stay competitive and keep my job, to will AI eat my job and then my job will no longer exist anymore. So I think that you're speaking to a lot of people right now who have those fears and are really concerned about how they can stay adaptable. And that's what I really appreciated in going through the book, along with other things like your appreciation for the environment around you. You're hiking in the Colorado hills and all of this different stuff. You mentioned the environment a lot in the book. I really, really value the fact that you are addressing something that I think so many people are fearful of, and that is this uncertainty that we have today and the way technology is impacting the workplace. A lot of times, when there's so much uncertainty, it's really hard for people to stay in that curious space, to think about things from moment to moment, and to think about like each moment is unique. They don't want to stay curious because they're afraid. They're in survival mode. So, how can people stay in that curious space? How can they adopt a sort of ongoing practice of curiosity when they're afraid or when they're in such uncertain times?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that fear is okay. And being scared in the moment is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what you do with that fear. In fact, in many ways, I wanted to write a book that wasn't necessarily, hey, You've got to figure this out and stop being scared of this stuff. I wanted to say, hey, I see that you're scared. I've felt that fear myself. Now, what do we do about this? How do we get to that place of curiosity? And I think that the fear comes from a lot of different places. It comes from a sense of losing our identity and who we are. We pride ourselves. It gives us a foundation to be able to define ourselves. If I were to ask you, KiKi, the question, well, who are you? It's very likely that you would respond with one or many of the roles that you play. That's a very normal, natural thing to do. But what happens when someone or something comes along and disrupts that story that you're telling yourself, that disrupts the story that you tell others about who you are? It can be really jarring, and a very normal human response to that is fear, is pushback. It can show up in anger. It can show up in defensiveness. And so the intent of the book was to acknowledge that, but to provide some thinking about how you could work through that. Now, the question, how does curiosity show up? Curiosity is definitely a theme in the book. You noticed it in there. I talk a lot about it. And I think that's a smart way to go is, can you bring yourself to a place of neutrality where you're not judging the environment around you harshly, but you're judging it through the lens of curiosity. Why is it this way? What's happening? What can I do from this place? I think that control tends to narrow our vision and curiosity widens it.
Hmm.
And so many of us are control freaks. I will raise my hand and say I tend to be that type of person. I'm sure a lot of people are watching and going, yeah, I've been told. I think most of us have these little things that we really try to control. All we're doing is trying to control our environment and what we can do, but we really push up against walls when we try to control everything. And I know personally for me, I tighten up when I try to control everything around me. My thinking gets very narrowed and rigid. I start protecting what I already know. But when I'm able to shift into a space of curiosity, even just slightly, something shifts. Something shifts in my brain. Instead of asking a question like, oh no, is AI going to replace me? I ask, well, what part of my work could this enhance? What part of my work is being upgraded? What new skills do I need to take on? What should I try that I've never tried before? Instead of saying, why is this happening to me? Which again is such a normal human valid response. You say, who am I becoming? Or how can I become the person to meet this moment? I think curiosity lowers the emotional temperature that control can often raise. It doesn't eliminate fear, but it gives you breathing room. It turns into information, into data. And that's one of the themes in the book is, can you see all this information that's coming to you as almost neutral data? Can you use that as a source to be able to make smart, informed decisions? That's how I interrupt fear. That's how I interrupt panic, is to try to always come from a place of curiosity.
I do think that it's so helpful to look at these emotions as data points, as like, okay, I'm feeling this uncomfortable feeling of fear here. I'm feeling rejected here. I'm feeling like these things that we want to push away and never experience in our lives. Like nobody's saying like, I want to feel more rejection in my life. But when you see it and then you're looking at it with this curiosity, it's like, why am I feeling it? Well, because I feel like that didn't go as well as I thought it could. Why? Because they looked at me funny and it didn't end up in an invite. And it's like going down that track. That means there's desire there. There's a desire to be invited into that room. Why do you want to be invited to that room? And I think it's really fascinating in a world that is heavily medicated, where we're trying to do away with all of the hard feelings instead of maybe getting curious about why they're there in the first place and taking that exploratory look at what they mean and what they reveal about our deeper desires and needs and wants. Someone asked me a question earlier today. It was a reporter asking me about job loss and things suddenly changing. And she said, is there a theme that you're hearing from the people that you're talking with that are going through the job loss? And one of those themes that I thought about was how there was this question of the actual event itself and the meaning that they took from it, and trying to wrestle between reality, like the actual event, and the meaning that they were taking from it. So, what I'm hearing you talk about here is an exploring with curiosity, really saying, what is the meaning I'm taking from this thing? And what's the facts of it? What can I learn from this data?
Yeah, well said. And I will tell you, when we talk about job loss, I speak from a place of experience because I was laid off in my career. And it was a really formidable time for me. It really caused me to rethink who I was and what I was valuing and how I defined myself and my identity. And it was really hard, right? It was really hard. And so when it happened, did I immediately go to a place of curiosity? KiKi, I did not.
You didn't.
No, I didn't.
Did you explore anger and fear and like,
All of those things, all of those things. And, in hindsight, I wish I could have maybe pulled myself aside and said, okay, let's get to a place of curiosity sooner. But I will tell you that it helped me to build resilience. It helped me to understand that opportunity often comes from setbacks. In fact, more than often, most of the time, opportunity comes from setbacks. And I can say this, and I don't say this to imply that for everyone, this will be their experience. But for me, getting laid off was one of the best things that ever happened in my career.
wow,
It catapulted me in a new direction that I never would have considered or thought of. There were people around me in my network who I was able to reconnect with and really show my strengths, my values with. And it was just a huge change. So I'll never grab someone who's just been laid off or who might be laid off and say, it'll be the best thing that'll ever happen to you. No, not necessarily. But is it absolutely a moment for you to check your mindset, to look for the facts, to come from a place of curiosity? Absolutely. It's one of the hard things we can deal with in our career, but it also gives us a chance to test these ideas of adaptability. Because when we hold on to a job, when we hold on to a title, oh my gosh, I'm a VP of so and so, that sounds so great. I feel so important. I feel so valued. And that's not a bad thing. But then when that is taken away from us, we feel more than replaced, we feel erased. And so, what if we were to focus more on adaptability as a skill? In the book, I talk about something called the end of expertise, and it's a provocative way to open up this conversation. Do I think that it's the end of expertise? No. Do I think that expertise is going away? No. But do I think that for many of us, we put too much stock in our expertise? Yes. Expertise can open the door for us, but it's adaptability that helps us to stay in the room and even better, go to different rooms, find different hallways and different buildings and different cities that we can work in. I'm playing out the metaphor, but you get what I mean.
yeah.
Can we reframe our mind? Can we come from a place of optimism? And by the way, I should say, I want to caveat something here, KiKi, because I think it's really important. I think sometimes when people hear people like me or others speak from this place of optimism, they immediately go, toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And toxic positivity is very real, isn't it? I'm sure you've seen it or experienced it or maybe been accused of it. It's a real thing. Toxic positivity is when we try to make everything right in our brain, but we don't allow reality to play a role in that environment that we create for ourselves.
You're 100% right, because there probably is somebody out there that's going, it's really great to talk about how great it is that you were laid off and you found this new path. I've got to make my mortgage payment next month, and I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. So, exploring new directions and being curious sounds good, but is it going to help me pay my mortgage? Right. There's definitely that argument. I can understand that so completely. I understand that feeling. And yet, I think that the answers that you're looking for, the ways that you're getting there are through things like curiosity, understanding your values and your strengths.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Because I mean, I know that people have approached you. You were just talking about the toxic positivity element yourself. So, thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's something I've put a lot of thought into. And I think there's a difference between toxic positivity and healthy positivity in having a growth mindset, which I think is a very healthy mindset to have, and having a mindset of negativity and nothing is going to work for me. What we have to realize is that we have scripts in our brain. We have a narrative, and that narrative plays a much bigger role in our lives than I think most of us even understand.
Mm.
We're constantly speaking to ourselves and we're telling ourselves things about who we are and what we're experiencing. There's a story happening right now in our brains. And I think it's incredibly empowering to understand that you can affect that story, that you can change that narrative. And that narrative will change the way that you navigate difficult choices and decisions. So, of course, you can't think your way positively outside of paying your mortgage. But can you have a growth mindset that tells you this is a challenging position? And I know that I'm equipped to be able to deal with it, and that I've dealt with challenges before. And that as a person, I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm getting better. And by the way, for many of us, whether we are willing to admit it or not, we reach a certain age. I'm not going to put out a specific age, by the way, KiKi. I'm just going to say there's a point, and in the book, I call it the arrival illusion. And this happens both professionally and personally. In the book, I talk about it professionally, but it happens personally as well. And that is this moment where we go, well, I'm an adult. Not that I know everything, but I figured out enough stuff. I'm not going to put as much effort into that beginner's mentality, into learning new things. It's very common, and we all do it at certain points in our lives. And so part of the growth mindset, that healthy positivity, is understanding you'll never arrive. It's the journey. It's the journey of the beginner's mindset, that mentality that we can learn new things. And so earlier you mentioned AI. It's something I think a lot about. I will never call myself an AI expert. In fact, in the book, we talk about the end of expertise. So I have to be really careful that I don't even place myself in any kind of category of expertise. But what I am is a very open, curious learner. In fact, I say in the book, I didn't write this book because I had all the answers. I wrote it because I had the questions, and I thought we would explore it together. So when it comes to AI, I'm involved in very interesting conversations about AI with some very smart people. I use it in my work in some very interesting ways. And I think having that curious mindset about how it can do more than just make you more efficient, but to actually amplify your unique human qualities
Ooh.
is a wonderful, exciting thing. What if we saw AI as an opportunity for us to be more human instead of taking our humanity away?
Ooh, I love this train of thought.
When I look at it that way, the curiosity muscle in my brain goes, oh, well, what does that mean for me to be my most human self? How do I bring my unique, messy, imperfect, creative, critical thinking self in ways that AI can mimic, but not necessarily do? AI becomes a tool that lightens my load so that I can do things like go onto this podcast, which to me is a very human endeavor. I'm talking with you. There are people listening and watching. What a wonderful human connection moment. And I will tell you, part of the reason I've had the opportunity to do this is because I've used AI to free me up in a lot of ways, to help me think differently about the work that I do. Now, to some, that again might feel overly optimistic, but I prefer to come from a place of humanity can be bettered with the smart and responsible use of tools like AI.
I love that. Another element of dealing with AI in our day to day is this question about trust. Trust comes up a lot for these sideways stories. Trust comes up a lot when you are looking at change and having to adapt. With change, trust is usually facing some kind of challenge. It's either been fractured, somehow broken, somehow bent. There's been something that has been challenged with trust, whether it's trust in ourselves, trust in others, trust in the workplace, trust in leadership. What role have you seen trust play in your own sideways moments?
It's definitely played an important role in a lot of different ways. First of all, in the career path that I've chosen for me today, which, as I mentioned earlier, you never know where I'm going to go next. But for now, a lot of people need to trust me to be able to be a leadership development professional, to provide insights to teams in moments of planning or brainstorming or strategic planning when it comes to coaching leaders through challenging situations. What I'm trying to do is create an environment of trust for them, but I can't demand it of them. I have to earn that trust. And so that means that I need to trust myself. And so I think trust has played an important role in me because first I need to trust myself, not necessarily that I have all the answers, but that I could learn them and I can learn again. I need to trust that being a beginner and having a beginner mindset is not going to erase my experience, but it's going to enhance it in a lot of new and interesting ways. I have to trust that me asking smart questions doesn't make me less credible. And, we have to admit, and I'm wondering if some of the people listening today, your listeners, can have that realization that oftentimes we don't ask questions at work because we're afraid that we will look like we don't know what we're doing.
Hmm.
That's very common. It's very normal. But I have to trust that asking questions will not make me less credible, that it will help me to learn more. Now, the other role is, of course, trust in others. And I don't give that trust blindly. And I've had to stop pretending like I've got it all figured out. And that means that I need to look for people who I trust that can inform me, but to look outside of maybe some of the more common paths of trust, like a boss. Of course, I hope I trust my boss.
Yeah.
But I tell you, throughout my career, I've trusted and learned from some of my younger colleagues in ways that other people wouldn't ever be able to help me to understand. In learning new technologies, new tools, that requires a little bit of humility, but it also requires trust that that vulnerability of me opening up to these younger colleagues is not going to cost me my value. It's actually going to be a very positive thing. In the book, I have a chapter called Credible Vulnerability, and having that vulnerability is part of the equation of trust. It's about, can we be our most authentic, vulnerable selves in moments? And that's not easy,
No.
but it can definitely help. And then the last thought when it comes to trust, so you trust yourself, you trust others. And then, of course, you need to trust systems, which is very hard, KiKi. It's very hard. I don't do this blindly. I don't trust that systems will protect me. But I do trust in my ability to understand systems and respond to them accordingly.
Mm.
So for me, that's the role trust plays in systems. When I say systems, I mean organizations, teams, ways of working, even political systems, whatever those things are. I can trust that I can respond in the right, healthy way in those moments. So for me, adaptability isn't about blind optimism. It's about earned trust in my ability to adjust.
That's really interesting. And I'm wondering if that's a good segue into this next question I had for you, which is about the difference between bending and breaking. The title of your book is Bend, Don't Break. And I do like to think about the fact that it's good to be able to be adaptable and bend without breaking. How do you know the difference between the healthy stretch and the actual breaking point? Because I think sometimes people might find themselves, they think they're bending and then crack. Like a little bit too far. I don't know. So, like, is there some sort of magical answer that you have?
Wow, the magical answer. Here's the magical answer. There's no. There's no magical answer.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's no magical answer.
Yes.
But it is the worthy question. It's a really smart and interesting question, KiKi, because as I wrote about it, I didn't want to encourage blind flexibility, just adapt to everything around you. There's a time to adapt and there's a time to push back. And there's a time to ground yourself. And then there's a time to be agile and flexible. We talk a lot about stress. It is a very common conversation, as it should be. But what we don't talk about is healthy stress. In fact, there's a term for it that nobody uses. It's eustress. EU stress. It means healthy stress.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah. So go pop that into ChatGPT or Google or whatever, and you, like me, will go, oh my gosh, why are we not talking about this? Healthy stress can feel uncomfortable but energizing. There's a healthy tension to eustress that makes us act in positive ways, that propels us forward. There can be fear with eustress, but there's also growth. Maybe you're tired, but you're energized, right? You care. And I think that that's a healthy place to be. What we don't want to do is placate or entertain ourselves to death to a place where we're unable to move or work or make decisions. So sitting in that place of that healthy tension, that eustress, is a great place to be. Now, when it moves into unhealthy stress is very unique. It's very individual, but you start to notice something. Breaking feels a little different than bending because breaking comes with resentment. It comes with feeling numb. It comes with feeling cynical. It comes with performative acts. It comes with masking and an inability to be genuine and true to what we think is really important. In the book, I use the metaphor of a tree to talk about healthy adaptability. And as we know, every great tree has a strong set of roots. And so, the irony is that as we talk about bending, the ability to bend comes with having strong, healthy roots. And so unhealthy stress, that breaking, a lot of times comes because we haven't chosen the right roots. And by the way, whether you've consciously or unconsciously chosen, you have roots and you should be intentional about them. What have you rooted yourself to? I mentioned earlier in the podcast, a lot of us root ourselves to titles or careers. We say, I'm an accountant. That's who I am. And nothing against accountants, but what happens when something comes through and does that job so much better than you would ever do it? Oh my gosh, I've rooted to the wrong things. Sometimes we root to opinions or beliefs, and we say to ourselves, this is it. This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is my opinion. And then new information gets shared and you go, oh no. And by the way, I speak from a place of experience in everything that I'm saying. This has happened to me time and time again. I root myself to something and I go, this is it. This is what I think. And then something comes through and I go, oh boy, why did I root myself to that so hard?
Yeah.
I think that the things you root yourselves are things like values, because values to me are evergreen. They provide a foundation to shifting environment. They don't need to change necessarily because the environment is changing. It's understanding your unique strengths. Strengths to me are different than skills. It's having a purpose. It's grounding yourself in a purpose. And by the way, this works just as well for an individual as an organization. Organizations often root themselves to the wrong things. They'll root themselves to a product, or they'll root themselves to a process or some kind of brand. And they realize, oh no, the world has completely changed. Why did we root ourselves to this? And so in answering your question about the difference between the healthy stretch and then the breaking side of it, there's no perfect way to answer it, but you notice when you're at the point of breaking, you get defensive, you get numb, you stop being curious, you start protecting who you are and what you know. That's usually a sign that you're moving towards breaking. Stretch expands, breaking erodes.
That's excellent. Well, I want to ask you a question that is maybe going a little bit into a different direction. And that is to get a little meta about the process of writing the book. Now, look, when you decide to go into writing, bend, don't break, during that process, was there something you discovered about yourself or your own relationship to adaptability that surprised you? Something that maybe you uncovered through that process that you weren't expecting? Because I think that a lot of times when we start to explore, even if we think we know a topic really well, in that putting it down on the page process, we sometimes uncover new things, new connections. Maybe it's new insights we just never made before. Did that happen? Or am I just reaching for something that isn't there?
Oh, KiKi, this is such a good question. It's such a good question. How much time do you got?
Let's go. Let's go.
Here's why it's a good question. It definitely resonates with me for sure. In my job, I work with teams, leaders, organizations, and help them through change. That's a very simple, oversimplified way of describing what I do. And a few years ago, I started to notice some themes as I was chatting with leaders, as I was chatting with teams and executives. And by the way, these are people who are at the tops of their fields from some of the most well-known brands in the world. And part of us think, oh, they have got it figured out. And hint, they do not. They are challenged by the rate of change in technology as much as we are. So what I started to notice were these themes of defensiveness against the rate of change, frustration with being forced to change against their will, frustration with technology and AI and it moving so much faster than their capability to learn it. And that's when I started to write. What started was, honestly, for me, a series of LinkedIn posts. And I just felt like I had something to say on this topic. I had no intention of writing a book. I just wanted to write things on LinkedIn. But after I did a bunch of those, I started to notice a thread, and that thread was about adaptability. And I thought, oh, we should talk about this. We should talk about adaptability. And that's when the moment came into my brain. I've never been a person that aspires to be the author or the writer. I so respect people who have done that, have said, I'm the author. For me, it is so hard to write. It's like,
Is it really?
it's wrenching something out of my soul. It takes so much effort and so much work, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. But I felt so strongly about writing about it that I started to compile these thoughts and ideas into a book format. And the process of working with a publisher was very humbling. So I had a lot of publishers go, nope, not it. Nope, this isn't it. No, we don't want to work with you. And I'm not even talking about the publishers that just ghosted me, that didn't even want to talk with me. But there was a moment in that process where I shared a version of the book with a publisher, and he replied and said, no, but I'm going to tell you why.
Mm.
And what he said was, you're saying some really interesting things, but I don't feel it from the heart. Why are you writing about adaptability? In essence, he was asking the same question that you're asking me. And I said, oh, it's because everyone around me is struggling with this. And he's like, nope, not it. Why are you writing about this? He kept asking it over and over again. That's when I came to realize, oh, this is very personal for me. This is a topic that really strikes close to home because I've had to face so much change in my life, both professionally and personally, because I've reinvented myself, because I've adapted to new careers, because I've struggled with change. I say right in the introduction, hey, just want you to know this author who's writing to you today has struggled with change. And I have. And I realized, oh, this is a lesson I need to learn for myself. And that's when it clicked.
Wow.
And I'm so grateful to that publisher. And I didn't end up working with that publisher. I worked with a different one. But his willingness to really force me to get to the heart of it is when the book really took on a new life. And I realized this is something that I feel so passionate about because I've had to adapt. I'm trying to adapt. I've struggled with adaptation. I've reinvented and begun again so many times. And I wanted to share some of that knowledge with my readers.
God, I love that. I love that. That's so amazing. And it actually speaks to a lot of the reason why I created this podcast, which is those sideways moments. For me, Your focus on adaptability is my focus on those moments when things really hit. And it's like, what are we going to do now? The path will not stay the same. This is a moment where things are going to change in your life, whether you like it or not. What are we going to do next? And how people make those choices. I love this. I think that's why it was the perfect book for things go sideways. And I think it's the perfect book for a human. Because I mean, I don't know one single person out there who doesn't have those sideways moments, who doesn't have times where they need to adapt, because what is the only constant, right? Change. And so I'm thankful that that publisher pushed back to get you to really recognize the passion inside of yourself that drove you really to write all of this. And I'm thankful for the fact that you get up on stages and you facilitate and that you talk to people with the honesty that you do, because I think that that really rings true. And that's why your messages resonate so well.
Thank you for saying that, KiKi. I really appreciate that.
Looking back, is there anything that you have had to grieve, an identity, a role, an old story about yourself, in order to move forward? Have you had to go through a grieving process for anything that you had to let go of?
Yes, so many times. When I laid off, I had to grieve what I thought I was building in that organization. And I had to allow myself that time to grieve. I mentioned graphic designer and creative director, and I have this creativity within me, right? And I just love it. It's such a part of who I am. It's part of the reason that I love music so much. I love design. And you know what's funny is I realized I'm not a very good graphic designer. And so there was a moment of realization where I was just doing the best that I could. And of course, I believed that I could get better and better and better. But I realized, oh, maybe I need to take a little different path. And I grieved that moment
Mm.
because what I saw in my future was Mr. Creativity. And I learned to realize that I could channel that creativity in new and different ways. So in many ways, I've grieved my identity over and over and over again. But the older I get, and you can see the gray hair, I'm getting older, that grieving process is easier. It will always be challenging. It will always be hard. And I have so many more things to grieve in the future. I know I will. But because I've been through it so many times, and I'm just talking about the professional stuff, I've grieved so many things personally as well that we won't get into today. But I think it gets better because I see it as an opportunity to start anew while bringing everything that I've been through with me. You know, adaptability doesn't mean starting over fresh every time. No, it means arriving at the moment with the version of yourself that is best equipped for that moment. And that means trying new things. And it's to do it in ways that you don't have to burn out, sell out, or shut down. And so grief is a part of it, and it always will be, but it gets better.
For someone who is listening, they might be feeling the ground shift beneath their feet even now. They might be going through their own sideways story. What feels honest to say to them without promising a tidy outcome?
Yeah, no promises, no tidy outcomes. First, I would say you're not broken, you're not wrong, and you're not crazy. The ground is shifting, period. And I think understanding that and knowing that is really healthy and helpful. Things are shifting, things are changing. And if you feel destabilized because of that, that is a super normal human rational response to change, especially right now with so many changes happening in our lives. And what I would say is no promises, but you don't have to reinvent yourself overnight. Adaptability is a long game. And that's part of what I wanted to get at in the book was describing the difference between that flexible adjusting or being agile in the moment. It really comes from a long-term decision that you make to become more elastic. And that's something that you can do over time. And the way you do it is through small, simple steps. I talk about checkboxables in the book, which is this made up word that is a horrible misuse of the English language.
I like it though. I like it.
And yet, there's something interesting about a checkboxable because all it is just a little task that is so specific and so narrow. That's it. You know exactly what it is. The moment I say it, you know what it is.
I know. I love filling out that. I love checking those boxes.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
And it's doable.
Yeah, it is very doable. And it doesn't mean that you relegate your life down to a series of small tasks. To me, checkboxables are experiments. That's the healthy shift. And so as the world is shifting around you, you can absolutely build your capacity to adapt by doing a series of small experiments, as I call them, checkboxables. And you can absolutely, as you do these experiments, stay rooted to your values. This doesn't mean uprooting everything. Let your methods flex. Let your opinions change. Let your job and your profession grow and morph, but ground yourself in something purposeful. The risk isn't that you'll have to learn something new. The risk is that you're going to cling too tightly to who you used to be. So start small, stay curious, run a bunch of experiments, and you don't have to abandon yourself to adapt. You just grow.
Matt, thank you for this conversation. It has been fantastic. I definitely think we're going to have more in the future as you continue to talk to people about your book. It wasn't that long ago that this got released. So you're fresh into being able to speak directly to this published book that everyone needs to run out and check out. What stood out to me about our conversation was that bending isn't weakness, that it's awareness and it's paying attention to these signals, whether it's in our work or in our teams or in our bodies, before that strain turns to a break. And folks, if you're listening and you're recognizing yourself in this tension between who you were and who you're becoming, this can be your permission slip. You have permission to slow down, get curious, slow the narrative down. You don't have to fix it all at once, nor probably should you. And you don't have to resolve it today. So I want to wrap up today with a quote from the philosopher Seneca, who said, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." Have a great rest of the week, everyone.